Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A few questions. One is on the Youth Advisory Panel. How many members are there currently on the Youth Advisory Panel?
In the previous term, we had 20 members around the table, with the exception from the Great Barrier representative, which we were missing back then. And
were they the 20 part of the local board areas?
That's correct.
Okay. The proposal to have 6 to 10 members now on the advisory panels, has that come out of the report?
Yes, so the report was proposing the independent review report, and also alongside with our internal discussions with various staff members, suggested that we move from a representation model to competency-based model. That recommendation was made because even within the youth sector and youth people in Auckland, there are various diverse communities and people whom 21 or 20 people cannot possibly represent. So also at the same time, this change will give us more voice on Maori. So one of the recommendations we are proposing is that each advisory panel will have at least one Maori person or more to provide views on Te Ao Maori. So that is another aspect.
So Austin, in the report,
yes,
I've read it, so I may have missed it, but did it specifically say between 6 and 10? Or is it as per our agenda, which is staff recommendations are, it's between 6 and 10 on page 30? So look, I justify that question, Mr. Mayor, because there obviously will be other members of the last term that will not be there, which is okay. But that's the question, the reason for the question, Austin.
Yeah, I understand that, Councillor. I think that may be a debating point when we come to it, and you can elaborate on that then. At the moment, I just want the technical questions to our officials, please. So
look, I don't think it's in the report, but I stand corrected. Payment of members in regards to workshops, will they be paid?
Yes.
And the chief liaison councillor role, whose decision was that in regards to the terms of reference?
It was the Mayor's decision.
Mayor's decision. I've got a recommendation, Your Worship, that I'm going to table in regards to the advisory panel numbers. So I'll just shadowing that.
That's fine. You can foreshadow that.
And just one more technical question. If A of the report, the recommendations we currently have go through, how will that affect the numbers of the Rainbow Advisory, the Rainbow Communities Panel? Because currently at the moment they've got 12 members, and I've heard you say that 2 of them had resigned, but they've currently got 12 as part of their membership. You've said that they will continue as per the last term, which is 12, but there is a recommendation, and which is the chair's recommendation, or the recommendation on our agenda, that they become 6 to 10 members. So what happens in regards to that? Because we're also going to have the terms of reference, which has 6 to 10, and you currently have 12 on the Rainbow Communities Panel.
Just leave it at 10.
Do we revert back to the terms of reference, or do we revert back to what has been suggested, which is that the numbers stay at 12 for the Rainbow Communities Panel?
So the number of 12 will be an exception with the Rainbow Communities Advisory Panel, and that number will be retained in the current term.
So can I suggest then that there needs to be an amendment somewhere? Because the terms of reference are 6 to 10, and your recommendation, or the recommendation on our agenda, says 6 to 10 members for the Rainbow Community Advisory Panel.
So the terms of reference proposed in your report actually includes that clause with an exception of the Rainbow Communities Advisory Panel.
I think that one's covered. now.
Well, I just don't see it in the recommendations we have. Is there some more coming up?
No, it's on that the status quo will be maintained for the Rainbow. I haven't got it in front of me, but I'm imagining that's covered under the existing recommendation. Thank you, Councillor Filipaina. Could I have Councillor Newman, please? Questions, remembering, not debate at this point. Are you wanting questions?
Yes,
Yep,
absolutely.
please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Austin, having read through the pages of the $80,000 report from Martin Jenkins, with respect to Appendix 3, the review participants for the semi-structured interviews, which is listed on page 124 of our agenda, I don't see, and I stand to be corrected, I don't see that there has been any discussion with members of our existing youth councils with respect to their feedback to inform the recommendations on the youth advisory panel. Have any of our youth councils been engaged?
So youth advisory panel members and chair have been part of the consultation process.
Yeah.
And also we sought advice from the local boards, local board members around the new structure of advisory panel model.
That doesn't answer my question
No,
around the...
so it's specifically to the members of youth councils, no.
Yes. Okay. So, I mean, I have a couple of concerns, I suspect, similar to Councillor Filipaina and Councillor Simpson. I'm just wondering if there would have been some benefit in that engagement with the youth councils prior to the preparation of the recommendations which are set out to change the structure or the composition of the youth advisory panel based on any information that you might be able to glean from the youth councils that have been set up across, well, in some parts of the Auckland region, I understand, possibly more places than I realise, but and I'm just wondering, actually, Your Worship, if the officers consider that there might be some value in having some further conversation with the youth councils before we proceed with the recommendations on the changes to the youth advisory panel.
Yeah, that's not a question officials can answer. There has been some discussion and there is an amendment that has been tabled by Councillor Filipaina about the numbers of the youth advisory panel, and there will, in the discussion and debate, I think, be further suggestions on what might happen in that regard.
All right.
Okay.
I'll hold it.
Thank you. Councillor Denise Lee.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A question in regards to recommendation C, where it says, I note that it may be appropriate to consider a different model for engaging with diverse communities at the end of the term of council. So what would the process be to flesh out that word may? It may be appropriate. So if that may was to be, it will be appropriate, what would the process be? This sounds quite open-ended.
So we haven't developed that process in detail yet, but I think what this recommendation is seeking to do is highlight the fact that the Martin Jenkins report, and it was a very specific part of the brief that we had given them, was to look at alternative mechanisms, and in their recommendations they're saying continue with the current model for this term, but actually look at implementing other models. And so it is throughout the term, and we would need to, give some thought about how we're going to do that in practice. Just looking at the other models that they are recommending.
Their suggestion is to look at other models, but we're saying we may.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in the previous terms of reference in the previous term, it also included we may look into the review of advisory panels, and it was that clause in that terms of reference that actually got us to do an external review. So we are definitely looking into that, and we will look into how we can actually have better functioning towards the end of this term, should we need one. So
I think the short answer, Councillor Lee, to that question is the committee has spent a lot of, the expert group has spent a lot of time making recommendations. It's suggesting some changes. If those changes work, we may decide not to look at other models. If we're not satisfied with those changes, we will. I think it just gives us a bit of time to see whether the recommendations from Martin Jenkins are adequate in producing the results that we want. If they're not, then certainly we might come to a different model, including looking at the things that Councillor Simpson has suggested. Okay, Councillor Sayers, questions?
Yes, two questions, Mr Mayor. One with regard to Seniors Advisory Panel. Would that membership definitely include members from Age Concern and Grey Power? Just confirming that. And the other question, Mr Mayor, if that panel exists, Senior Advisory Panel, do you personally have any interest in being involved in that panel?
Is that because of the colour of my hair, Councillor?
No,
That's a very unkind reference to make. I think we haven't set out organisations, we've set out criteria, and we'd be following the criteria, but one might assume that provided the representatives of those groups meet the criteria, they could well be on the panel, but we haven't made that specific decision here in the paper, nor would it be appropriate to nominate organisations. We say, this is what we're looking for, and then we appoint the people who best meet the criteria of what we're looking for.
Thank you.
Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, thank you, Mr Mayor. My question, I've got one for Marguerite first, if I may, and it's to do with inclusion and effectiveness, particularly around the Disability and Seniors panel. I note that with the review, you did consult with Alistair Cameron with regards to the CCOs. So can you advise whether on the issue of disability, which is a really important one for the wider council family, whether there is current duplication within CCOs, whether there are other models that are currently in operation, and if so, was there evaluation to do with the effectiveness of perhaps a CCO model vis-a-vis the council panel that we have. So can you just comment on, because it was important to me that there was consultation on that particular issue?
So in the case of Auckland Transport, they do have what they call advisory groups, which is specifically looking at operational matters. The distinction we made between those advisory groups and the, for example, Disability Advisory Panel is that the Disability Advisory Panel will be able to provide strategic input in such cases as Council's annual plan, the Auckland Plan refresh, which the strategic groups in the CCOs may not be able to contribute. And also the Disability Advisory Panel and Seniors Advisory Panel should be able to have an opportunity to provide overview and their advice on Council's Disability Operational Action Plan, which covers some of the operational and strategic actions of the CCOs.
Thank you. So did you give consideration to the weighting that the council family might put on where we have some duplication in these advisory groups?
Yes.
Did you give consideration to where the weighting should be and the consistency of treatment vis-a-vis issues like remuneration and so forth? Was that a detailed part of this review?
So the remuneration part, we strictly follow the council's, Auckland Council's remuneration policy, which is fees framework. Auckland Transport and other CCOs, they've got separate policies and the framework for their advisory groups.
So my question now is actually directed to you, Mr Mayor. If I may, my question is specific to you. In your consideration in putting this forward to us, given that we know that there are duplications and there are different practices, did you consider waiting with these recommendations until such time as we saw the effectiveness of the committees? Perhaps, and maybe I'll just foreshadow perhaps for the debate, but I'm interested to know why the timing of this is now vis-a-vis waiting for further information through the committee structures that we have.
Yeah, I think the short answer is that a lot of this work was done obviously prior to the election, but there was a mood amongst the councillors that chose to discuss this with me, that they would like the panels up and running at an early time, and the mood that I picked up around the campaign trail, I guess, at a lot of different meetings was that people valued the panels. They thought they could operate better, but they wanted to see them up and running. I think we've got enough room for discretion within it, Councillor Fletcher, to, I'm happy to have a discussion with you about whether there was duplication. If there is, then we can raise that with the committees. We don't want them duplicating things, but even more importantly, we don't want gaps left in this area that I know is very, very important to you.
No, I share your concern in terms of inclusion and but also the effectiveness. Yeah. And I guess it's just really important to me that you have given consideration to the fact, with the knowledge that there will be some duplication.